Hi everybody and welcome back to the Coderoom. Okay, this lesson builds on the last lesson directly. Okay, so if you haven't seen that, definitely go check that one out. And it talks about inline versus block versus inline block. Okay, so now that you understand the difference between inline block and inline block, all right, I want to talk to you guys about the box model. All right, so the box model is this concept that's used in CSS to do some interesting styling to elements like links, like paragraphs, like headers, like everything actually, okay? Now, what you should know about the box model is that the box model only applies, okay, to block and inline block. It does not apply to inline elements, okay? So if you have an element that's by default inline or you styled it to be inline, okay, this stuff won't work. You have to first change it to inline block or block, and then you'll actually see the effects of these, okay? All right, to understand the box model, we'll use a very common diagram, and you'll see this all across the internet, okay? So this diagram represents an HTML element, okay, that has a display value of block or inline block, okay? So let's say we have a link, and we set the value to be block, okay? Let's say inline block. All right, so the content is what's actually inside the link, okay? So if you wrote Google or test link or whatever, or hello, okay, the text that appears, okay, that is represented by this box in here, the content, okay? Now, once you have that content, you can add a border if you want, okay? So you can add a border, and that's what this outer line represents, okay? And that border can be a certain thickness, can be a certain style, can be a certain color. Now the space between the content and the border, okay, that is what we call padding, okay? So the space between your words hello or Google or whatever link, okay, the space between that and the border is what's called the padding amount. Okay, so this space right in here, all right? And then on the outside, you have what's called a margin. And what the margin does is it basically says where to render any elements that are beside or surrounding this element, okay? So if you have no margin, they'll be hugged up right against each other, but margin pushes it out past that border, okay? So let me give you a concrete example. If you had the word hello, it would look something like this. So the content would be hello, and then you'd have a certain amount of padding to the border, then you have the border, and then you have a certain amount of margin that shows you how it would render next side by side with another thing, okay? So let me show you that here actually. So this is what it would look like if you had two hello links side by side, okay? And with CSS, you can control how much margin, how much padding, how much border, okay? And the last thing I'm going to mention before we dive into a demo is that the margin, border, and padding don't have to be all consistent around the entire box, okay? What I mean by that is you can actually have the top margin be a different value from the bottom margin, be a different value from the left margin, be a different value from the right margin, okay? These margins, borders, and padding can actually have all different values or all the same values. Or you can have the top, the vertical ones the same and the horizontal ones a different value, okay? All right, but you have to understand that this, when you render a block or inline block element, this is how you want to view the margin value, the border value, and the padding values, okay? So let's actually see a demonstration of this, okay? All right, so let's actually create a new section here just for these demonstration purposes, okay? So I'm actually going to create a new section here. All right, and I'm going to call it my let's say the best links ever, okay? And let's put this inside a paragraph, okay? And I'm gonna put two links side by side here. Okay, so I'm gonna put a link here, href, and let's just go to Google. And let's put another link side by side with that. Okay, and we'll call this, we'll go to Engadget. Okay, so these are any links that are inside a paragraph tag. Let's just target those ones specifically. Let's now target these ones at the top. Okay. So let's take a look at any link that's inside a paragraph, okay? Now, technically, when we do this, we will be affecting these links down here because they're also inside a paragraph. Okay, so let's refresh that page. Okay, so we have the links here. Now, we have some leftover styling from the previous lesson, so I'm just gonna get rid of that. Okay, so up here in this anchor tag, we have a display inline block and background red. Let's just get rid of those. Okay, save that, refresh it. Okay, and then we're back to where we started. Okay, so I just want to affect these links here within the paragraph. Okay, so right here. Now the very first thing I'm going to do to demonstrate this is I'm going to have to set the display property. Remember what I said is that this only applies to display inline block and display block. Okay, so I'll write display inline block. Okay, so save that and refresh it. Now what that does is it still keeps them in line, but it gives me access to these things like the border, the padding, and the margin. So to see all this in action, let's start with the border. Okay, this is something we've seen before, all right, when we do tables. So on this link, I'm going to specify a border. And to specify a border, you specify 3 values: the width of the border, the type of the border, and the color of the border, okay? So we'll say the border is going to be 2 pixels wide, it's going to be solid, and let's say it's going to be green. So save that. So there you go. We have this border that's surrounding the content. Now you'll notice there is actually a little space between Google and Engadget. And that's because actually when we typed in the HTML, we had a space between the two, right? We hit enter. And what HTML does is it represents that entirely as a single space, okay? So for these demonstration purposes, I'm actually going to get rid of that space, okay? So I'm going to get rid of this space in between the two, all right? So I just have these links side by side here, and then refresh, and you'll see they're right directly side by side. Okay, so let's continue with this demonstration here. All right, so we have the border that's surrounding the content. Now the question is, how do we actually get space in between Google and the border? I mean, the border is right up against the G and right up against E, and same thing with Engadget, right? Well, let's go back to our box model. Okay, so the box model says that the space between the content and the border is called the padding. So let's add some padding. Okay, so we say padding, and if you want all the padding to be the same, you just specify 1 value in terms of pixels, okay? So let's say I want 20 pixels of padding on that link. So come back here, refresh, and there we go. We had 20 pixels between the word Google and the border, and that gives us our padding, okay? Now we've already set the border, and the last thing is these links seem a little bit close side by side. I want to increase the space between my element and the element beside it. And that's what's known as the margin. Okay, so this is the space that exists outside of the actual element and the padding, but it creates some space between it and the next one right beside it. Okay, so let's say I want the margin to be about 10 pixels. Okay, and now remember, if you want the margin on the top, bottom, left, and right to be all the same, you just specify 1 value. Okay, so save that and refresh, and there we go. Now there's a 10 pixel space all around this Google before you render anything else. All right, so that's a quick demonstration of the box model, and you'll find this becomes very, very important when we get into things like divs and spans. Okay, now before we leave, I want to show you guys a couple more things on the box model, okay? All right, the first thing I want to show you guys is what happens when you add a background, okay? What does the background apply to? Well, for the box model, the background only extends out to the border. It doesn't extend to the margin, okay? So let's add a background to these and show you what that looks like. Okay, so background, and let's say the color is gray. So save that, and there you go, okay? That's a pretty dark gray. Let's make it a little bit lighter using hex colors. There we go, that's a bit nicer, okay? So that's what happens with backgrounds. And now the other thing I want to do is show you guys how to specify different margins and different paddings, okay? And they all use the same method. All right, so let's start with padding. So let's say for padding, you guys actually want the horizontal padding and the vertical padding to be different. Okay, so let's say you actually want 10 pixels on the top and the bottom, but 20 pixels on the left and right. Okay, so the way you do that is you just specify 2 arguments. Okay, so padding, we specify 20 pixels, that's all the same. If you actually specify 2 arguments, it takes the first one as the vertical padding and the second one as the horizontal padding. So let's save that. And there we go. So there's only 10 pixels on the top and bottom and 20 pixels on the left and right. Okay. Now that's how you specify different for the vertical and different for the horizontal. Let's say you want to specify all 4 to be different. Okay. Well, the way you do this is you specify 4 different values. Okay. So the way you do that is you look at it starting from the very top and you go clockwise. Okay, so the 4 values you specify are top first, then the right, then the bottom, then the left. Okay, start at the very top and go clockwise. All right, so let's say I want 15 pixels at the top, and then you go clockwise. The next value is the right padding, so 20 pixels on the right. Let's say I only want 5 pixels on the bottom, and then let's say 50 pixels on the left. Okay, so top, right, bottom, left. Okay, refresh, and there we go. Okay, so the top is a certain amount, the right's a certain amount, the bottom's a certain amount, and the left is a certain amount. Okay? You can also do the same thing with margin. Okay, so say margin, I want 0 pixels on the top and bottom, but 10 pixels on the left and right. So I'll save that, refresh this. Okay? Or let's say I want all different values. So the top 0 pixels, the right 10 pixels, the bottom 15 pixels, and the left 20 pixels. And there you go. Okay? So just a quick reminder, if you specify only 1 value, it'll be the same for all around. If you specify 2 values, the first value is for the top and bottom, and the second value is for the left and the right. And then if you want to specify 4 values, you can do top, right, bottom, left. Start at the top and go clockwise. Okay? Now the very last thing I will say on this is that you can actually code these values out manually using properties like padding top, padding left, padding right, and padding bottom. Okay? So if you don't want to specify all 4, or you want to write this out more explicitly, okay, you can do things like padding left 5 pixels. Okay? Padding top 15 pixels. Padding right 20 pixels. Padding bottom 5 pixels. Okay? So these 2 statements, so this group of statements and this statement are actually the exact same. And you can do the same thing with margin, okay? It all depends on your style. If you only want to override one of the values, it probably makes more sense to use something like this. If you want to override all the values, it probably makes sense to do something like this. All right, that's the box model in detail. Hopefully you guys understand that, and we'll see you guys in the next one.